this is me, author H.L. Burke, and I'm going to be answering a Fellowship of Fantasy tag question today. And that tag question is, what is my favorite fantasy movie? Quick word about the Fellowship of Fantasy. We are a new co-op for fantasy authors who write mostly family-friendly fiction. We have an on-site rating that lets you know if the fiction does have more of a teen rating, but no explicit material is allowed. So a lot of YA authors mostly. And we are making a video series of answering these tag questions. And as I said, the first one is my favorite fantasy movie. And I'm curious to see what the other authors came up with. I came up with a couple honorable mentions too, just because I thought I should quickly go over those. And then I'm going to bring out my all-time favorite fantasy movie and defend it. There may be some noise in the background. I apologize for that. My daughters like to play superheroes, and if you hear screaming in the background, I promise they're not killing each other. I've gone in and checked on them a few times, and every time I've asked, Claire, are you okay? Are you crying? She goes, I'm playing. She's not crying. She's just putting somebody in a headlock in her game, and her toy is crying. So that just happens here. You get used to it. So let me start with my honorable mentions. And my first honorable mention is the movies based on my absolute favorite books, but because of that, they aren't my favorite movies. I understand on an intellectual level that film is a different medium than books, but on an emotional level, I can't watch these movies without this idea of what could have been, because my idea of the characters in my head was better, and there are certain things that got left out or rushed or just messed with that I don't really understand. And so that is why the Lord of the Rings trilogy does not make my top spot. I do love those ones, and I have one of the few books that I can reread. I'm not a big rereader, but that series is one of the few I've reread, and it's kind of part of my mythology as a person. It's part of who I am. So I definitely love the movies from that standpoint, but from another standpoint, they aren't my favorite because of what could have been. And on the alternate version of that is a movie that is actually one of the few that I think is better than the books. And that possibly has something to do with the fact that The Princess Bride, the movie, and The Princess Bride, the book, were written by the same person, who is a screenwriter and understands the difference, I think, between the medium, and was perfectly happy to make two different approaches to the same thing, making them both very different. And the movie is a classic. The book is good, the movie's a classic. But it's more of a classic in an I smiled the whole way through sort of way. It's not emotionally touching to me. I mean, Inigo gets close to it. I mean, his emotion for his father and things, but the love story is kind of just cute, and most of it's just kind of tongue-in-cheek and just a really good fun romp, so that's why it didn't make it in. That's what I'm dealing with. Now, on the other flip side of that is a one that might, if I found this when I was a child, might have made the top spot, but I only found it a couple years ago. And Spirited Away is a beautiful, complex movie with character development and this world that is just amazing and original, and storytelling that is awesome. And I'll talk a little bit about visual storytelling here or later, but Spirited Away is an excellent movie, and that almost might have made the top spot. However, I have an emotional tie to, drumroll, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And I hear the boo and I hear the hiss because you say that's sci-fi, that's not fantasy. But this is fantasy. It has a princess, it has a sword fight, it has a grizzled old mentor, it has magic. The Force is magic, that's all it is. So the Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, this is the movie that made me think that romances weren't so bad, because I grew up with romances being chick flicks, rom-coms. And I never really got into those, but Han and Leia, I was into that. I love that, and that is the benchmark for me for a romantic relationship, which is probably pretty sad, but that's what I wanted. I wanted Han growing up. No Corin, don't do this. Sorry, I had to give my child the look. But anyway, the Empire Strikes Back, I can talk about it. It's a really technically well done movie. The effects hold up, and you can't say that for a lot of movies made in the 80s. There is some Star Wars cheese, but for the most part, it was handled really maturely. They were able to take it dark and more realistic than any other book in that, or any other movie in that trilogy. They took risks, and the thing I love about it is that, you know, Luke goes off, and there's this message you can take for it, that Luke goes off to save his friends, and that's what he did wrong. But when you get to Cloud City, does Luke go to save his friends? He pretty much just lets Han and Leia go right past him. I mean, maybe he doesn't understand that Han is in that kryptonite block. Kryptonite, why did I do that? I've watched a lot of Batman v Superman trailers, reviews lately. Sorry, carbonite block. And maybe he doesn't know, but he lets them basically take Han away. And I was thought, why didn't he go after them? But because when he gets to Cloud City, he loses his focus on what he was there for, his friends, and he's tempted to fight Darth Vader over revenge and anger. It's no longer about his friends, and that's where Luke makes his mistake. I like to think that if Luke had stayed on focus, Yoda wasn't right that he shouldn't go after his friends, but Luke doesn't go after his friends, and to me that was Luke's failing, and he had his dark moment there. And I kind of think that that's what the prequels got wrong about the Jedi Code, and it's not about detachment, because Luke's attachment to his friends might have drawn him into that situation, but it's not what pushed him over the edge to make him have that dark night of the soul. It's abandoning his friends. And so I think that's actually a good message that a lot of people maybe miss because of what happens. But anyway, so I mentioned something about visual storytelling. This tells you everything you need to know about the characters through action and image, and that's awesome. Like Han, when he goes out, you see him like kind of quipping with Luke at first, but when Luke is lost and Han, he doesn't do this long monologue about what Luke means to him, and you don't hear monologues about what a rebel Han is and how he doesn't respect authority. But when they start to tell him that if you go out and just you can't go out, you can't leave, he's like, well then I'll see you in hell, and he takes off. And then it's just awesome. And you paint this character in a couple of lines, and I love that. I love The Empire Strikes Back. It is one of my favorite movies ever, if not my favorite. I haven't done a top 10 movies list for myself, so they're all kind of like mushed together, the very little bits of that and a little bit of this. And that I love you, I know scene. I mean, most of my favorite parts of this movie are about Han and Leia. In fact, when I had the VH copy as a kid, I would literally fast forward through the Luke training parts. If I watched it again, I wouldn't do that, I promise. But once you've seen them, you've seen them. And with Han and Leia, I could like mouth the words along with them. And I love the humor, and I love the adventure, and I loved how it doesn't end where you expect it to. Though I kind of knew that going in because I watched the Star Wars movies in a really odd order. I was convinced I wouldn't like them as a kid because when I was very little, I saw an episode of Star Trek Next Generations, which I have since identified as the one where Geordi almost turns into some sort of shadow beast and he has like veins and stuff, and it scared the... I was really scared of that when I was little. So I convinced myself I didn't like sci-fi, and because of that I wouldn't watch movies that might have aliens in them because they might have weird alien diseases turning the Reading Rainbow guy into an alien monster, and I didn't want to see the Reading Rainbow guy turn into an alien monster. And so what finally convinced me is I saw them watching Return of the Jedi, and I watched that. I was like, oh, this is okay. And I think then I watched A New Hope and then An Empire Strikes Back. Weird way to do it, but I already knew that Vader was Luke's father. Sorry, spoiler there. Because Dark Helmet was Lone Star's father's brother's sister's cousin's uncle's former roommate. And because of that, I knew. Somebody had explained the joke to me at some point. Yeah. So anyway, that is my top favorite fantasy movie, and I'm sorry if you're mad at me because it is a sci-fi movie. But what you gonna do? Bye.